There I was, sitting in the park, a total klutz with a mission to drop ice cream on strangers. And that's when I saw him again. It had been years since high school, but I'd recognize that face anywhere. Anthony Miller, the guy I'd had the biggest crush on back then. He was just as handsome as ever, those warm brown eyes and that charming smile. Before I knew it, my clumsiness kicked into high gear, and the next thing I knew, my ice cream cone went flying straight at him. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I blurted out, my face flushing crimson. To my surprise, he just laughed it off, that smile never leaving his face. "No worries, it happens." As he grabbed some napkins to wipe the mess off his shirt, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Anthony? Anthony Miller? It's me, Samantha Davis, from Westbrook High." His eyes lit up with recognition. "Samantha? Wow, it's been ages. How've you been?" We spent the next hour catching up like old friends. He was working in IT for a big tech company, while I freelanced as a graphic designer. The conversation flowed so easily, and before I knew it, he was asking for my number. "We should grab coffee sometime, catch up properly," he said with that disarming grin. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was practically squealing like a teenager. "Yeah, that'd be great." A few days later, we met up at a cozy little cafe. The awkwardness of our high school days was long gone, replaced by an easy rapport. We talked about our lives, our dreams, our families, well, most of our families. "So, your mom must be proud of your career success," I commented offhandedly. Anthony's expression darkened. Not exactly. My mom's, well, she's a piece of work, never really approved of anything I did." I could sense the bitterness in his voice, so I quickly changed the subject. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of mother could be so unsupportive of her own son. Little did I know, I was about to find out firsthand. A few weeks into dating Anthony, he invited me over to his place for a home-cooked meal. I was excited to meet his family, even though part of me was dreading it after what he'd said about his mom. The moment I stepped through the door, I knew I was in for a rough night. Anthony's mother, Margaret, eyed me up and down with a look of disdain. "So, this is the girl you've been seeing," she said flatly, not even trying to hide her disapproval. Anthony jumped in quickly. "Mom, this is Samantha. Samantha, my mother Margaret?" I extended my hand with a polite smile. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Miller." She barely shook my hand, her grip limp and her expression sour. "I see. And what is it that you do for a living, Samantha?" "I'm a freelance graphic designer," I replied, trying to keep my tone upbeat. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "A freelancer? So, an unstable income with no real career prospects. How quaint." The word stung, but I tried to brush it off with a laugh. "It's actually a pretty lucrative field these days. I do all right for myself." "I'm sure you do," she said dismissively, already turning away. Over dinner, it only got worse. Margaret seemed to take every opportunity to criticize my life choices. "So, your parents let you just gallivant around without a real job. How irresponsible of them. That top is quite revealing, isn't it? I'd hate for you to give the wrong impression." With each snide remark, Anthony grew more tense, his jaw clenched. Finally, he snapped. "Mom, that's enough. Samantha is my girlfriend, and I'd appreciate if you treated her with some respect." Margaret's eyes went wide with mock surprise. "I'm just making conversation, Anthony. No need to get so defensive." "No, you're being rude and judgmental like always. Just stop." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Margaret finally broke the tension with a sickly sweet smile. "Well, I'm terribly sorry if I've offended you, Samantha dear. I'll try to be more open-minded in the future." But the way she said it made it clear this was far from over. As I lay in bed that night, I had a sinking feeling that Margaret was going to be a problem. Little did I know, it was only the beginning. Despite Margaret's icy behavior, my relationship with Anthony only grew stronger. After a year of dating, he surprised me one night by getting down on one knee. "Samantha, you're the most amazing woman I've ever met," he said, his eyes shining with love. "Will you marry me?" I was speechless for a moment before throwing my arms around him. "Yes, 1,000,000 times, yes." We were both overjoyed, giddy with excitement as we started planning our dream wedding. But of course, Margaret had to go and ruin it. At every turn, she criticized my choices, from the venue to the flowers to the guest list. "That barn is so rustic. Don't you want something more elegant? Those roses are so cliché, dear. You're inviting your entire office? How tacky. Anthony tried to stand up to her, but she always played the innocent victim. I'm just trying to help make your day perfect. Why are you so against my input? I could see the strain it was putting on Anthony, constantly being caught between us. I tried to be the bigger person, to compromise where I could, but Margaret was relentless. The dress you picked is all wrong for your figure, she snapped one day as we pored over wedding magazines. You'll look frumpy and matronly. That was the final straw. Tears stinging my eyes, I turned to Anthony. I can't do this anymore. Your mother is impossible to please. For once, he didn't make excuses for her. You're right, she's being completely unreasonable. He pulled me into a tight hug. From now on, we're doing this our way. No more compromising for her. With Anthony's support, I regained my confidence. We planned the wedding we wanted, ignoring Margaret's constant barrage of criticisms. On the big day, she showed up with a sour look on her face, clearly displeased with every detail. But I didn't care. I was marrying the man I loved, and nothing could ruin that happiness. Well, almost nothing. During the reception, Margaret approached me with a fake smile. I have a little wedding gift for you, dear. She discreetly slipped an envelope into my hand. Curious, I opened it to find an old newspaper clipping inside. It was an article about a house fire from years ago, with a tiny picture of a young girl, me. My breath caught in my throat as the memories came flooding back. I looked up at Margaret, shaking. Why would you give me this? Her smile turned cold and cruel. Just a little reminder that some scars never truly heal, no matter how pretty you try to dress them up. Clutching the article, I fled outside, gasping for air as panic gripped me. Anthony found me a few minutes later, crumpled on a bench. Samantha, what happened? What's wrong? I could barely speak through my sobs. All I could do was hand him the clipping, those horrible memories replaying in my mind. As the realization hit him, Anthony's face contorted with rage. That evil. I'm going to kill her. He moved to storm back inside, but I grabbed his arm, terrified. No, Anthony, please. I just want to get through this night, then never see her again. His shoulders slumped in defeat, but he nodded grimly. Okay, we'll get through this, and then I'm done with her for good. As we rejoined our reception, his arm around me protectively, I couldn't stop thinking about the cruelty his own mother was capable of. In that moment, I realized this was only the beginning of her torment. After the wedding fiasco, Anthony and I decided it was time to start fresh, just the two of us. We found a cozy little house in a nice neighborhood and jumped at the chance to make it our own. The day we moved in, I was buzzing with excitement, already envisioning how I wanted to decorate, but that feeling was short-lived. Well, this is certainly quaint. Margaret's voice cut through my happy thoughts like nails on a chalkboard. I spun around to find her standing in the doorway, uninvited as always. What are you doing here? Is that any way to greet your mother-in-law? She tutted. I just wanted to see the place my son has tied himself to. Anthony stepped in, his jaw clenched. Mom, you can't just show up unannounced like this. Don't be silly, of course I can. She waved a dismissive hand. Now why don't you show me around this charming abode? I could tell Anthony wanted to protest, but he knew it was useless. With a resigned sigh, he began the tour. With every room, Margaret's criticisms grew sharper. This kitchen is so outdated. The master is rather cramped, isn't it? Surely you'll want to renovate this place eventually. Finally, we ended up in the living room, where she paused to scrutinize the fireplace. You know, I do hope you'll be careful with this, Samantha. Wouldn't want another incident. My blood ran cold as she shot me a pointed look. She knew. Somehow, she'd found out about the fire that haunted my childhood. Mom, that's enough. Anthony's voice was low with warning, but she just laughed lightly. I'm simply looking out for you both. Fires can be so unpredictable. Later that night, I finally broke down and told Anthony the whole story, how I'd accidentally started a fire when I was 9, burning down our house and leaving me with trauma I still struggled with. He pulled me close, his eyes filled with understanding and sorrow. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, and I'm sorry my mother is using it against you now. That's unforgivable. I don't know how to deal with her cruelty, I admitted shakily. She seems determined to make my life miserable. Well, we're not going to let her. His voice took on a steely edge. From now on, We protect ourselves, understand? She's crossed a line, and I won't stand for it anymore. I nodded, feeling a small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could stand up to Margaret's torment. But as the weeks passed, she only grew bolder in her digs, constantly questioning my contributions to our home. Surely you're not paying half the mortgage on that paltry freelance income, she'd sneer. Anthony, you really need to look out for yourself here. One day I finally snapped back. My career pays our bills just fine, thank you. I'm pulling my weight in this marriage. Margaret's eyes glinted dangerously. If you say so, dear, though I do worry about the stability of it all. I wanted to scream, to claw that smug look right off her face, but I knew that's exactly what she wanted, to rattle me until I cracked. So I forced a tight smile, refusing to give her the satisfaction. Don't worry about me, Margaret. I can handle myself just fine. She simply raised an eyebrow, utterly unconvinced. We'll see about that. As she swept out, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Her torment was only just beginning. A few weeks after the house incident, I started noticing something strange. A beat-up sedan seemed to be following me everywhere I went. At first I brushed it off as a coincidence, but it kept happening over and over until an icy feeling of dread settled in my gut. Anthony, I think someone's been tailing me, I admitted one night over dinner. There's this car that keeps showing up wherever I am. He frowned, concerned. Have you gotten a good look at who's driving it? I shook my head. No, the windows are too tinted, but it's definitely the same vehicle every time. That is weird. He pondered for a moment. Maybe we're just being paranoid, though. I don't want you to worry unnecessarily. I forced a smile, trying to push aside my unease. Yeah, you're probably right. I'm sure it's nothing. But the nagging feeling persisted. A few days later, I spotted the car again as I left the grocery store. Enough was enough. That's it. I'm confronting them, I muttered, striding over to the vehicle. I rapped sharply on the driver's side window. Excuse me? Why have you been following me around? The window rolled down a crack, revealing a pair of beady eyes peering out. I ain't following nobody, lady. Beat it. Before I could respond, the car peeled out of the lot, leaving me fuming. I relayed the encounter to Anthony that night. Okay, that's really not cool, he frowned. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. True to his word, the next time the sedan showed up, Anthony marched right over and knocked on the window, his jaw set with determination. A scruffy-looking man rolled it down warily. What do you want? I want to know why you've been stalking my wife. Anthony's voice was dangerously low. And I want the truth, or else we're going to have a problem. The man's eyes widened, and he licked his lips nervously. Okay. Some lady hired me, that's all I know. She paid me to keep an eye on your wife, make sure she wasn't up to no good. My heart plummeted as the realization hit. I should have known. Did this lady have a name? Anthony pressed. Nah, man, I don't know her name, but she's around 60 with short gray hair. That was all I needed to hear. I felt numb as Anthony dismissed the man with a curt nod. As soon as the sedan took off, he whirled on me, his eyes blazing with fury. Tell me you didn't actually think it was her. I could only nod mutely, suddenly terrified of his rage. That evil, manipulative witch! He exploded, slamming his fist against the car. How dare she stoop this low, spying on you like some criminal? Anthony, please calm down, I pleaded, my voice shaking. Let's just go inside and talk about this. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. You're right. I can't believe my own mother would do something like this. We settled on the couch, and I gently took his hand in mine. I hate to say it, but I'm not surprised at all. She's made it pretty clear how much she despises me. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Well, this is the final straw. I'm cutting her off for good after this stunt. I opened my mouth to protest, to play peacemaker as usual, but this time I simply nodded in grim agreement. Margaret had gone too far, and this time there would be consequences. A few months after the stalker incident, I found out I was pregnant. Part of me was overjoyed. Anthony and I had been trying for a while, but another part couldn't help dreading how Margaret would react. At first, I decided to keep it a secret, not wanting to deal with her vitriol during such a delicate time, but Anthony insisted on sharing the news. My mother has a right to know she's going to be a grandmother, he stated firmly, Besides, maybe this will be the thing that finally makes her accept you. I highly doubted that, but I didn't argue. Instead, we invited Margaret over for what Anthony called a family dinner. The moment she arrived, I could sense her suspicion. Her eyes narrowed as she looked me over. "You're glowing rather radiantly this evening, Samantha. Something you'd like to share?" I opened my mouth, but Anthony jumped in. "Actually, Mom, yes, we have an announcement." He took my hand, beaming. "Samantha's pregnant. We're having a baby." For a beat, Margaret was silent. Then her lips curled into a cold smile. "Is that so? How wonderful." The way she said it, so dripping with disdain, made my blood run cold. This was not going to go well. Sure enough, Margaret spent the entire dinner making snide comments. "Let's hope the child inherits my family's complexion and not your unfortunate olive tone, Samantha. You'll want to start looking into the best private schools now. No grandchild of mine is attending public institution." Anthony tried to deflect, but I could see he was growing increasingly agitated. Finally, he'd had enough. "Mom, why can't you just be happy for us?" he exploded. "This is supposed to be an exciting time." Margaret simply shrugged, unfazed. "I am happy, Anthony, truly. I just want what's best for my grandchild." It was then that I noticed her glass was nearly empty. She must have refilled it several times over the course of the night. "You know, I'm actually feeling a bit parched myself," I said abruptly. "Let me top you off there." Before she could protest, I scooped up her glass and headed for the kitchen. I watched in the hallway mirror as Margaret's eyes tracked me suspiciously. As soon as I was out of her line of sight, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. With trembling hands, I unscrewed the cap and tipped a few drops into Margaret's wine, swirling it to dissolve the substance. My heart was pounding as I returned and set the glass back in front of her with a sickly sweet smile. "There you go, bottoms up." If she noticed anything amiss with the taste, she didn't show it. She simply took a long sip, holding my gaze in a silent challenge. It was done. If she wanted to keep doubting my pregnancy so badly, now she'd have proof, one way or another. Little did I know, the proof would come with devastating consequences. Hours later, I was doubled over on the bathroom floor, waves of searing pain ripping through my abdomen. Anthony rushed in, panic written across his face. "Samantha, what's wrong? Oh, God." His eyes went wide as he saw the smear of blood on the tile between my legs. "We need to get you to the hospital now." The next few hours were a blur of emergency rooms, concerned doctors, and Anthony's ashen face. Finally, the news came. I was having a medical abortion, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. As I lay there, crying bitter tears over the child I'd already loved so fiercely, one terrible thought consumed me. Margaret had won again. In the aftermath of losing the baby, I was numb, hollow. Anthony tried his best to comfort me, but the guilt and grief were all-consuming. And underlying it all was the burning question: how had Margaret found out I was pregnant? The answer came a few days later when Anthony checked the security camera footage from our house. He called me over, his expression grave. "You need to see this," he muttered, hitting play. On the screen, clear as day, was Margaret entering our kitchen alone. She opened a cabinet, retrieved a small vial, and proceeded to pour a few drops into her wineglass before returning it to its hiding spot. My stomach turned as I realized what she'd done. That vile woman had deliberately tried to make me lose the baby. Her own grandchild. That evil bitch! Anthony's shout made me jump. He slammed his fist on the table, shaking with rage. How could she do this? Her own flesh and blood. Tears burned in my eyes as I watched the footage again, seeing her casual cruelty play out. I can't believe I actually thought she might accept this baby. I was so naive. "No, this is on her." Anthony's voice was low, dangerous. "She's the one who took it too far this time." He pulled out his phone and dialed, putting it on speaker. Margaret picked up on the third ring, her voice sugary sweet. "Anthony, dear, what a lovely surprise." "Can it, Mother?" he spat, startling me with his venom. "I know what you did." There was a pause, then a disdainful sniff. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to." "Don't play dumb." He was shaking now, barely able to contain himself. "We have you on camera, pouring something into Samantha's drink to make her lose the baby." Another pause, longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and cruel. "Well, it was obviously for the best. Lord knows that child didn't need you two as parents." A guttural sound ripped from Anthony's throat. "You're a monster. A pathetic, evil monster. How could you do that to your own grandchild?" "Please," she scoffed. "That was no grandchild of mine. Just the spawn of a scheming little witch trying to trap my son." That did it. Anthony's face contorted with unbridled rage. "I'm done, Mother. I'm completely and utterly done with you. Don't ever try to contact us again, because I swear to God I will." But whatever threat he was about to make, he stopped himself, breathing hard. After a tense moment, he ended the call with a vicious jab. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to reach for him, to comfort him after that brutal confrontation, but he held up a hand, warning me off. "Just give me a minute," he choked out, turning away to compose himself. I could only nod, stunned and shaken by the depths of Margaret's depravity. In that moment, it was clear she would never stop, not until she'd destroyed me completely. But something had shifted in Anthony, too. As he turned back to face me, his eyes blazing with determination, I knew he was finally ready to cut her out for good, to protect what we had, no matter what it took. The war had begun, and this time, Margaret was going down. After the devastating loss of our first pregnancy, Anthony and I were hesitant to try again. But over time, the ache of wanting a child overpowered our fear of Margaret's interference. This time, though, we were ready for her. 9 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl. As I cradled her in my arms, all the trauma and heartache melted away. This was the moment I had dreamed of, and nobody could take it from me. Not even Margaret. We didn't tell her about the pregnancy until after our daughter Lily was born. By then, the security system at our new home was airtight. Cameras everywhere, new locks, the whole 9 yards. She didn't have a chance of getting anywhere near us or the baby. When Anthony broke the news over the phone, her reaction was exactly what we expected. A tornado of anger and hateful words, accusing me of being a liar and a fraud. He simply hung up on her mid-rant. "Well, that's that then," he said with grim satisfaction. "She's officially cut off from our lives for good." I felt a pang of sadness for him, having to sever ties with his own mother. But I knew it was for the best. Margaret had shown her true colors, and I couldn't have that kind of toxicity around my child. In the months that followed, Anthony and I thrived as new parents. Maybe it was the high of finally having a baby, or the relief of being free from Margaret's torment, but I'd never felt so blissfully content. My career was also taking off in a big way. I landed a major contract with a prestigious company, finally allowing me to ditch the inconsistent freelance gigs that had made Margaret look down her nose at me for so long. As my income and reputation grew, I couldn't help but revel in the thought of Margaret eating her endless snide comments. Not that she'd ever admit I'd made something of myself, of course. Sometimes I did wonder if she was still out there, stewing in her hatred and coming up with new ways to make our lives miserable. Part of me remained haunted by the fear that she'd find a way back in eventually, like some tumor that could never be fully removed. But then I'd look over at Anthony, playing so adoringly with Lily, and I'd remember. This was my real family now, the one I'd chosen, the one I'd fought for against all odds. As long as we had each other, we could overcome anything. Even Margaret's cruelest revenge plots were no match for the resilience of our little trio's bond. We had built our own legacy, one of laughter and light, to overshadow her decades of darkness. Of course, relocating halfway across the country also helped put some extra distance between us and her black cloud of bitterness. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but after everything we'd endured, I wasn't taking any chances. That night, as I rocked Lily to sleep in her nursery, I couldn't stop the tears of joy from spilling over. Here was my happy ending, the one I'd worked so hard for and fought tooth and nail to keep. Margaret may have been my personal demon to conquer, my vindictive force to be reckoned with. But in the end, she was no match for the strength of a mother's love and the power of choosing one's own family. And I wouldn't have had it any other way.